Hi, this is Scott from SaaS Startup Stories, and today's show is sponsored by ActiveCampaign, the world's #1 email marketing and automation platform, and the system that I use personally to run my entire business. If you'd like to get started with ActiveCampaign and take advantage of the best current promo they're running, then go to scottdudley.com/AC and fill out the form. Today, my special guest is Chris Joyce. Chris is based in Philadelphia and is the founder and CEO at Gusher, which is a startup platform that connects startups with talent. So together you create and build your company. It's a simple, quick and easy way to create and build a startup without the need for investors or capital. Chris, you ready to rock and roll?
I'm always ready to rock and roll.
Excellent. Love it. All right. So let's start off with your background and what initially got you interested in starting a company to help startups.
Well, sure. Well, I've always started my own companies. I've had a ton of my own startups. I've started more than 24 companies in all different verticals, everything from B2B to B2C, everything in between. But really what made an impression on me was when I was very, very young, seeing my mom pretty much stuck in a dead-end job working for the government in the middle of Ohio. And there was no such thing as a venture capital ecosystem in Ohio. There still isn't. And there was no real way for her to get certain, businesses off the ground that she always had ideas for. And it took her well into her 50s to quote unquote make it, but she did finally make it. And that kind of always stuck with me. And I always had something or a way to go ahead and try to go ahead and solve that, which is why I launched Gusher.
Okay, interesting. All right. So can you expand a bit on the 3-part create, connect and launch formula and how Gusher actually works? Let's talk a bit about the actual system.
Yeah, sure. Gusher is a platform to launch companies without the need for capital, without the need for investors. The Create, Connect, Launch is really just a simplistic representation of what's involved. So on Gusher, you create basically a startup draft. It may seem kind of simple, but we walk you through everything, how to do it, how to do the pitch, the roles that are required to build a company. The connecting is really the interacting with people that apply to join your startup for performance-based equity. So nobody gets a thing in your company unless the company is able to achieve its goals, able to achieve its objectives. The launch is pretty much self-explanatory. You launch into the marketplace, or if you're a legacy company, you relaunch and you're able to get the company out there in a much better way. So Gusher is a way, what I say to founders really is, what would they do with $1 million or $2 million in the bank account? How would they build their company? What would they do with those funds? But instead of using funds, use performance-based equity and build that, because we do it all day, every day. Everything from B2B, B2C, B2B2C, and everything in between. We have more than 300 companies perking along in every different industry, every different vertical.
So it's not just SaaS, but would SaaS make up a large percentage of that, or?
Yeah, SaaS makes up approximately 15 to 20%, depending upon how you define SaaS. So there's many we would consider SaaS companies that are kind of like combination SaaS product companies. So they may have a physical good, but they're utilizing SaaS really as the main backbone for the ongoing revenue. But about 10 to 15% of our companies are quote unquote standard SaaS companies, traditional SaaS companies.
Okay, interesting. So why is performance-based equity a better model than seeking VC funding for SaaS startups?
Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, brief question, Scott. Do you play any sports at all? Anything? Have you done it in the past?
No.
Okay. Have you ever played football? I think they call it soccer. Oh, Aussie rules football. Okay. So Australian rules football. That's a great sport, a brutal sport. I absolutely love it. Okay. So let's say your chance of going ahead and winning a game of Aussie football, whatever the hell that may be, was 1 in 700 at the best to 1 in 1,500 at the worst case scenario. Would you play that game? Answer is typically no. Nobody's going to play a game that they have a 1 in 1,500 chance of winning. That's the venture capital game at a minimum. So your chances of getting financing in a standardized way of VC capital is minimal. I mean, absolute minimal. So really in terms of Gusher as an option, the only other option that people have if they don't have a big bank account, they didn't inherit money, they don't have wealthy friends, is basically they're stuck in kind of a catch-22. And so going ahead and using performance-based equity is a blessing. It's something that can help them get off the ground very, very quickly.
Yeah, makes sense. So, I mean, is the concept similar to something like Shark Tank?
Say that like Shark Tank. No, it's Shark Tank. It's funny. I won't go off on a tangent about them, but one of my attorneys represents a lot of the Shark Tank deals. But it's not. So what ends up happening is, think of it this way. We have a dog food company on our platform. I know that's not SaaS, but it's a good example. So the dog food company went ahead, the founder has a neat story where he had a sick dog. The veterinarians kept going ahead and telling him to feed the dog certain dog foods, everything else. Dog kept getting sicker and sicker. So he hacked his way to a dog food. 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, the dog basically was healthy again and started growing. So he wanted to form a company, a dog food company, okay, which has a very high capital intensive structure company. So I'm telling this for a reason. So the people that joined his company, this is a company that a year later is valued at more than 10 million. It's growing 30% month over month, really taking over. Literally, his team was a bunch of people that all had what, Scott? They all owned, it's a dog food company, not a trick question. They all owned
dogs.
Dogs, right. So what ends up happening is the teams on Gusher that form, these companies that come together, are teams of zealots. They're people that understand the markets. They're not somebody that isn't interested in dog food. They're not somebody that isn't interested in dogs. They're dog zealots. So what we see with SaaS companies primarily is that the core problem that they're trying to solve, there's always a market typically always a market that somebody relates to. So the whole point is not to get just, let's say, a developer. One of our SaaS companies has to deal with cardiac arrest in the emergency room. So one of the people that made up that team were people that were involved in that industry, that quote unquote got it. So they understood it. And that's a lot better. You asked the question is, why Gusher is better or a performance-based equity, because if you're able to get buy-in from that core market as part of your team, that's a self-vetting market process. It's big time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So without mentioning names, can you tell us a couple of stories about founders that have been successful with Gusher?
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, that dog food company I told you is extremely successful and kicking, and I'm happy to mention it. It's Happy Howl. It's everywhere. We've got another company out here called Smooch. Smooch kicks butt. There's something that just took off. That was a Villanova student, a college student here that went ahead and launched that. We've got a 59-year-old that during COVID went ahead and got laid off, started a company, and sure enough, a year later, he won Product of the Year. But really, these are not something that it doesn't happen or is very rare. Our percentages of success rate are actually extremely high. We've got greater than an 80% success rate where the companies become either self-sustaining and or attract larger capital. And that's really unbeatable. Nobody can compete with that.
Yeah, sounds like it. All right.
It's neat.
Yeah. Would a company have to be at a certain stage, or do they have to actually qualify to work with you? What's the minimum requirements?
Sure. Well, first of all, in terms of stage, about 90% of our companies are at the ideation stage. So they don't even have a solution. They may have an idea for a solution, but they're really identifying a big pain point. And so what I usually say to founders is that basically if they're able to identify that pain point and other people relate to it, the team is supposed to collaborate on what that solution ends up being. So that's the way basically we view it from the pain point perspective. In terms of stage, yes, 85-90% are ideation, 10 to 15%, because it varies, ends up being what are called legacy companies. So those are companies that can really end up having everything from a Series A round to companies that have an MVP already or are already in the marketplace, but something about what they created kind of fell flat. And so they need to almost in a way rebuild it or rebuild the team or pivot in a certain way. And so about 10-15% of our companies are pivots. Those companies come together a little bit quicker than the startups from the ideation stage.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So here's a good question for you. Why do SaaS startups fail, in your opinion?
I didn't catch that last part. Why do SaaS startups
fail?
So fail. Gotcha. See, it's that accent. That accent gets me. And believe it or not, my chief of staff is Australian, and it still gets me. So why do they fail?
Yeah.
The number one reason that I see why SaaS startups really fail, and it's not just SaaS, but almost in a way tech companies that have a tech product, but SaaS definitely falls in that category. It's going to sound basic, all right? But they're so busy creating a technical solution for this problem that they don't build the human elements in from the beginning. So, for example, they're not building the marketing in from the beginning. They're not building the sales validation in from the very beginning. And that's the thing with a startup and building a company that needs to be done. I'm talking like from day one. So before you go ahead and start developing and creating a product and everything else, there definitely are certain ways to test, etc. But you need to do sales validation as your primary component. And then you need to build the product using a tremendous amount of that sales input, the marketing input, the sales validation. And so they usually build technical teams that while they're great products, they end up being DOA in the marketplace.
Yeah. And of course, working with Gusher would avoid all of that hassle, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that we really make as a condition. We don't believe in MVPs, minimum viable products. We really believe in creating market viable products. And a lot of that product market fit talk you always hear about, that only came in existence really when VCs started funding companies really before they had proven that. Back in the 80s, 90s, when it was before, companies were done this way, development wasn't ass backwards. You would go out there and sell it and see, do you have a market, and create that product for that market, already knowing that you had a market. It wasn't throwing money out there and hoping to find some magical product market fit. You built the product to actually fit those markets.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's kind of been forgotten about.
Yeah. So speaking about failing, what would you advise listeners to do when the desperation hits?
Sure. Well, the first rule of thumb is you just don't stop. I know that sounds, again, pretty basic, but the reason most companies fail is because they simply stop. I get running out of capital. Running out of capital is not a reason to stop. Having your team members abandon you is not a reason to stop. Having your bank account emptied by your partner is not a reason to stop. There is no reason to stop at all, period. What founders, especially first-time founders, don't really realize is that failure is part of that process, but it's really just a step. It's not an end. What I always say to founders is that, you're on a roller coaster ride here, but there's only one person that can stop that roller coaster. And that is, and I point at you, Scott, who's the person that can stop that roller coaster?
Yeah,
is it your mom? No. Is it other people? No. Is it the government? No, not really. The only person that can stop that roller coaster is you.
Yeah,
so don't stop it, and you'll eventually get there.
Yeah. So what would you suggest doing when the model isn't proving itself out as expected? You've sort of already covered this a little bit, but would you pivot to a different model or?
Here's the thing. I know I said pivot earlier, but successful pivots are more rare than unicorns. All right. Everybody uses Slack as an example of a successful pivot, but really typically whatever road a company starts out on, it stays on. What I would say is the following. Most of the failures with the models are not necessarily failures of the models. They're failures of the founder going out there and literally banging on doors, talking to people face to face, literally doing the legwork of sales validation and interaction on a big percentage of their time. Sales and marketing cannot be an afterthought. It must be part of that DNA. Even if you're uncomfortable, even if you suck at it as a founder, you are still a god because you're viewed as a founder of that company. So your sales processes, your sales outbound is a lot more effective than trying to outsource it. You can't outsource sales validation. So if somebody's failing with their model, get out there and meet more people. Don't spend time developing. Don't spend time trying to figure out a digital way out of your failure. Go meet people. Go meet them over and over.
Okay. Well, I mean, speaking of Slack, I use Slack myself. What's the pivot that you're referring to? What did they do?
Sure. Slack in the beginning wasn't what it meant to be like right now. They actually had a different type of system, a different type of model in terms of monetization that they were looking to do. And then they suddenly converted it to, okay, here's this internal communications function. They were primarily going down a different road in the very beginning and completely turned it around. Their story is everywhere. You can definitely look it up, but I'm happy to go into it, but their story literally is a damn interesting story.
Yeah, well, they're pretty successful now, obviously. I think everybody uses it, yeah.
But they burned through a lot of capital, and then they pivoted, and then suddenly they made money, and then they were like a unicorn, like almost overnight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't bother with Facebook groups at all. For me, it's all Slack groups, but each to their own.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right,
I mean, we use Slack. That's our internal communication software. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly. What advice would you have for listeners struggling with landmine partners or investors?
Okay. Well, a landmine partner, let's define what it is, all right, real quickly. So you're out walking in the woods. Let's imagine this. You're 500 kilometers, 500 meters from civilization. Nobody's anywhere. And you suddenly hear a click as you step forward. So you realize you stepped on a landmine. So a landmine partner is somebody that didn't appear to be a landmine partner. Same thing with investors. There's landmine investors. And then suddenly you're in this scenario where, well, if you lift your leg off that landmine, you're going to blow the hell out of yourself and be in a bad spot. And if you stay on that landmine, well, you're going to sit there and starve and go ahead and die a lonely death, painful death over time, all right, hoping. So when you're dealing with landmine partners, typically the scenario is, all right, you go ahead and cut it off immediately and pick your damn foot up and run the fuck as fast as possible. You're going to get hurt. You're going to have some crap or spoonful of shit that you have to eat in order to get out of it. But the fact of the matter is, face the ugly immediately. The second you learn there's a landmine partner or a landmine scenario, don't wait for time to go by. Just hit it head on.
I mean, there can't be any advantage in letting it fester, can it? Like you said, you just got to tackle it.
Well, lawsuits are one thing. That's different. Many times time is on your side. But with landmine partners, it can get really cumulatively ugly in a compounded way. And it happens to every founder. You always have those. So you may have a partner that is, slow distancing themselves from you. You may have a partner that, starts showing up less and less or doing less and less work. Landmine partners take all different forms. But if you set your personal standard high to be performance, to go ahead and have a very high standard, you learn to cut cancer off immediately, because that's what landmine partners are. They're cancer. They're going to kill you and take you down if you don't cut it out of your damn body. Same thing.
But I mean, could you avoid that in the first place just by doing it on your own rather than finding a partner? Because that's probably what I would prefer to do personally.
Yeah, well, there's a difference in terms of levels of partners if you want to choose it that way. So you can go ahead and try to do everything yourself, all right? Yeah. So what will end up happening is, yes, you can go ahead and have something that you own, that you run, that you do whatever, 100% yourself, and not have these headaches and have a lifestyle business, and God bless you. That's a great scenario for certain people. But if you're looking to develop something that's a pump that you can step away from, if you're looking to develop something that you can sell and create wealth versus the equivalent of another job, which is basically what a lifestyle business is, you have to use the expertise of others. But, again, a landmine partner you can't identify. That's the whole point of a landmine partner. They don't appear as landmine partners. They don't have a big sign on their head. I wish they did, but they don't. So, and it could be a year later or 2 years later. So definitely hit it head on and cut them out.
Yeah. Okay. Love it. All right. What would you say is the single biggest challenge that you believe new founders are experiencing right now with growing SaaS companies?
I think it comes down to alignment and understanding of sales cycles. Okay. And I see this a lot. So they think they're able to penetrate a market. And this goes back to the sales validation. I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse, but it really does. So they'll go ahead, start contacting companies, start working their contact database, everything else, start trying to penetrate the markets. And they don't realize that with SaaS companies, most of the time, they have a long buying cycle. So short buying cycles for SaaS companies, many of them would be 3 to 6 months. Average buying cycle is going to be 9 months, a year. Longer terms is going to be, anywhere from a year, 2 years, even more than that. So they underestimate the amount of resources they need to tackle what they've created. And suddenly they're sitting there shitting their pants because it's month 4 or month 5. And they don't realize they're following a standard curve, that it's actually working beautifully. But they're like, oh my God, how do I pay the rent? Oh my God, how do I eat? And there's misalignment there with the product they created and how they do their market releases.
So cash flow issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
Okay, I see.
And then they go into desperation mode, begging for clients or discounting or everything else. And then it gets ugly.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than desperation mode, yeah.
But desperation creates great stuff. I think it's the creator of great product and great solutions. Desperation is good to have. They always say whatever the hell is the mother of invention, need and everything else. But the fact of the matter is desperation is the father. It's the father of invention.
Yeah, as long as you're not coming across as needy, though, I think that's a bad thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, just to switch gears a little bit, what's your favorite business book?
I'd probably say my own, which is called The Deal Rules, but I haven't published it yet. So I'll go ahead and say something else. Let's see. There was a book a while ago, all right, and it's by a gentleman by the name of Tom Hopkins. It was something I learned on Wall Street at an early age, but I think the sales methodologies and techniques are extremely important. I do think a SaaS founder should read it because it literally gives the blueprint for how to sell to anybody, anything. And Tom Hopkins, How to Master the Art of Selling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. It's actually behind you.
It's a classic, and it to this day, I think it's a great book.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. So just to wrap up, where can people go to find out more about Gusher?
Sure, they can go to gusher.co, Gusher.co, or they can look us up anywhere. We come up pretty much on everything pretty damn quickly. We're out there.
Excellent.
We're easy to find.
Sorry?
I said we're easy to find.
Perfect. Awesome. All right, thanks for coming on the show, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.